Hey, I'm David and this is Adobe UXP Things You Need to Know. Today I'm talking about panels versus commands in vanilla JavaScript plugins and the way they are expressed in the manifest.json, plus some other stuff, but this is the main plan, so let's get to it. I need some plugin samples to work on, so head to this GitHub repo and grab them all. The one that I'm interested into this time are the Direct Action JS sample, the Hello World Panel JS sample, and the UI Kitchen Sync sample. So let me load in Photoshop as well this first one here. So back to the Adobe UXP DevTool. And if you're unsure how to operate with the UXP DevTool, please refer to my previous video. Let's add this one first. So let's point to the manifest.json, which is here, and open. This loads it, not in Photoshop, but in the UI of the UXP DevTool. And then with this load command, we should find it in Photoshop, unless we don't. And the reason why we don't see anything is because this plugin isn't made of panels. If you remember something that I told you, I think in the very first video, is that UXP plugins could be made of 0 or more panels, 0 or more commands, 0 or more modal dialogues. And this one has no graphic user interface, has no panel. It's just one command. In fact, you can find it here in the plugins sample write layer names, and this is the command. Or also in the plugins panel. In here you find it, right? So let's see what this is all about. So let me try to run it first to see that it is operational. Please open at least one document. Let me create quickly one. Then duplicate the background layer a bunch of times. Click write layer names to a file, and this pops up this dialog that asks me to save this layer names txt. Let's pick UXP and then samples. This is a good place. I think it's done. So let's check in the Finder. We should have it UXP samples, and here it is, layer names.txt. And here are the layer names that I have in my document. So cool, this works. Now, I'm not really interested into the mechanics of the plugin, but in the way that it is structured to contain a single command or more commands, as we will see. Because you have to know, and this is very important takeaway, that in UXP, there is no concept of an independent script, at least so far. So the things that you were used to find, for instance, in the File, Scripts, Browse menu, so loading and running a JS6 file, a single independent script, this is not anymore a thing in UXP, again, at least so far. So things might change in the future, but right now, scripts can live only within the context of a UXP plugin, which is exactly what this sample write layer names plugin does. It contains one command, aka one script. So let's look at the code for it. And the one thing that I want to show you first is the manifest.json. So let me collapse everything. And here you have the ID, which in this case follows the reverse URL convention. So it's com.adobe. And then the name of the panel instead of the alphanumeric string that you are given by the UXP marketplace, actually by the developer console when you want to create a new product for the UXP marketplace. You could add here everything, even Mamma Mia, that's going to work just fine. Then you have the sample, which is the string here, the version 1.0.0, and the entry point, which in this case is a JavaScript file. And this makes sense because this plugin doesn't have a graphic user interface, so you don't have the need for an HTML file. Usually, plugins with panels have an entry point of an HTML, index.html. In this case, it makes sense to have a JavaScript file. In case of React, it makes no difference. You can have either the JS or the HTML. In case of the JS, it's React that is injecting the HTML elements in the DOM via JavaScript, right? So then the host array. We have Photoshop, minimum version 22.0.0, and the manifest version must be at least 4. Now let me skate over the entry points for the moment and let's focus on the icons. So this is an array, but it contains only one object because this icon that we are specifying here with this path applies to all the themes, the darkest, the dark, the lightest, and the light. Medium, I am positive, is just an Adobe XD thing, so you can remove it. And all is a bit redundant here. If you want to have an icon for the dark theme sets and another for the light theme sets, you just have to duplicate this entire object and, of course, pick the right icon and then set the themes for which it applies. Very important, the species here. It's plugin list. And this plugin list means the icon for Photoshop's own plugins panel, which is different in case of a panel that has its own icon. But we will see that when we deal with panel in the next example. So these are the icons, and please note that even if we specify this plugin-icon.png, we don't have it in the icons folder. We have plugin-icon at 1x and plugin-icon at 2x. This is because we have a couple of scales, the default one and the one for Retina displays. And we specify explicitly the size for the Retina one here. So the 2x is 48 times 48, and the 1x is 24 times 24. And we add the 48 here, okay? So these are the icons. Let's now focus on the entry points. This is an array because you can have more than one. We have just one command here, which is this one, write layer names to a file. So one object. The type is command instead of panel. And you have an ID of write layers. And this is really important. So remember that. And then a label. The label is, of course, what is written here, write layer names to a file. And it has a default property because you can localize this. So for instance, if you want to add an Italian version, you say ET, and then you add here the translation. Okay, but you must provide the defaults. Let me get rid of that. And be aware that training commas are evil in manifest. So they're going to break everything if you leave them around. So let's save back the file as it was. All right, so the ID I said is really important. So let me close those icons and let me open the index.js. Let's start from the very beginning. So you are requiring UXP, and UXP is provided by the environment. And if you are unfamiliar with this kind of syntax, which is modern JavaScript, let's say that this is equal to const UXP is equal to require UXP. So you're saying, listen, require UXP returns an object, and this object has an entry point property. So you could say UXP.entryPoint, and that would be perfectly fine. You could even say, listen, let's stick that into another constant. So const entry points, let me grab this here, equal UXP.entryPoints, right? With this modern syntax, you are saying, I understand that you're returning me an object with an entry points property, and I'm only interested into that. So please stick it into an entry points constant, okay? Right, so the entry points has a setup method, and the setup method accepts an object, which is this one. This object has a commands property, which is in turn another object. And in here, you can have all the commands that your UXP plugin is going to host, right? In this case, it's only one because we have only one. So this command here. And this property here must match absolutely with the ID that you set in the manifest.json. So think about it this way. The manifest.json tells Photoshop how to construct the UXP plugin. So what are the elements? You have one UXP plugin named this way that contains, for instance, one command with this name. But it's the index.js that links that menu item with the function that you're going to run. So this write layers command is going to run this write layers function, which is defined below. So let me collapse all those because we're not really interested in what they are doing, but the way they are connected to the manifest. Again, if you are unfamiliar with the syntax, well, this is just an anonymous function. You could write it like a function, and then instead of the fat arrow, you add parentheses here. Okay, so it's an anonymous function that runs a write layers. This is exactly the same. Actually, there is no need to wrap it with an anonymous function because you run just this. So you could just say write layers without the parentheses. Okay. Actually, even better if this was a lowercase l. So let me quickly rename this way. There is no need to duplicate the writing. You could just say write layers. Stop. Right? And this works. So let me save this just to show you that it works. This is being loaded. I want to watch it. It's watching for changes. I'm saving. So this should be it. And you see that it pops up the dialog as it is supposed to do. So this is a perfectly viable syntax. But let's get back to the original one. All right. So what does it say here? If we had other menu items, it would go here and in the manifest.json file. So let's try to do that. Let's add another command. So let me duplicate the entire object because we are developers. We love to copy and paste. And instead of write layers, this is going to be write, I don't know what, documents. Okay. And the label is write documents names to a file, like that. So in this case, we need to add another command. So comma and write documents and another anonymous function that, well, let me do something different. Since we have a show alert here, which is just a wrapper for the Photoshop app show alert function, let me alert something like, I don't know what, writing docs. Okay. So at this point, we have this command that matches this ID. Does it? It does. So let me save everything. I know for a fact that watching for changes, at least right now, doesn't take into account manifest changes. So if you see here, you find just one item and in the plugins menu as well. So you need to explicitly load it again. Plugin loads successfully. And now you have both of them. And let's click write document names to a file and then an alert should pop up. And sure enough, it does. So it works. So you have seen how to add another command, how to create plugins with a command. Just in case, again, you're not really familiar with this new syntax, let me tell you how to compartmentalize, is that a word? How to split the code into a different file. So we have all these functions here that you might want to have in another separate file. So let me create one and I'm calling this, I don't know what, lib.js. And let me paste everything in here. It's not too big of a deal. I mean, there are just 3 functions, but functions grow. Here we need the write layers and the show alert. So we need to export those in the lib.js. So let me module.exports. And then I want the write layers to disk, which is equal to write layer to disk. And then duplicate this and then do the same with show alert, which is here. Let me save this. And in the index.js, I need to do something quite close to that. So instead of entry points and requiring UXP, we are requiring the lib that sits in the same folder as this index.js. And we are interested in the show alert and in the write layers with a capital L. So this should work fine we are watching for changes. And if I click this, the alert pops up. And if I click the other, it doesn't. So something is missing. Let me try to understand what. Write layers. Oh, write layers to disk. I took the wrong one. So write layers is the one that I need to export, and it has a lowercase l. So let me save this and rename that as well. And I think that should be it. So write layer names to a file. Still doesn't work. Okay, let's take a chance and debug that. So debug. Type error. Write layers is not defined with a capital L. So probably again, I'm messing with the names. Oh, because I renamed that. Oh, my bad. To show you that you could just remove the second part of the assignment in the object. That was a capital L, write layers with a capital L. And again, capital L here and here. Save, capital L, save again. And this time, I bet that is going to run, please. Yes, it does. So it was a little error on my side. Apologies for the time spent. All right, so that was it for the commands plugin. Let's see what is in a panels plugin. So the Hello World panel.js sample. I want to add the plugin, which is this panel.js sample here. So let me point to the manifest.json and also load it in Photoshop. Load it successfully. And this time it has a UI. So it's just a panel. And you see it here, sample Hello World panel, right? You can close it and open it this way or from the plugin menu, Hello World sample. What can we do? We can show alerts. We can populate the layers very much like the other one, but this time in the panel itself. We saw that code in a previous video, and we can also clear the list. So let's see what's different in terms of manifest and the JavaScript code. So same things as long as the ID name version are involved. The main entry point is different though. We have an index.html, again, because this is a panel and it makes sense to have an HTML. The host is the same, manifest version as well. The icons are the same. Yes, exactly the same. The difference is in the entry points. For once we have a type of panel this time, an ID of Hello World. The ID is really important. We will see why in a moment. Then we have a bunch of sizes, minimum size, maximum size, that are exactly what you are expecting them to be. And also a preferred docked size. So when the panel is docked like this is a preferred size, and the preferred floating size. So when it is floating freely. All right, then you have the label again with the default Hello World sample and the icons. So this is different compared to those icons. So the icons that are outside of everything are the icons for the plugins panel. Whereas the icons that are inside the entry point, in this case, are the panel's icons. So these icons here, you see that this is pretty much different compared to that. Another difference for the icon is as follows. So you still have the theme, and in this case, you see that you have two different objects in the icons array, one for the darkest and dark and another for the lightest and light. But also you specify the width and the height of the default scale, not the retina scale. So on the one hand, these are different. So it's 23 times 23 and 46 times 46 instead of the plugins icons that are 24 and 48. So few pixels of difference. But here you set the standard/default size, whereas in the plugins panel, you set the retina size, right? So this is a little bit of a difference that you have to be aware of when writing your manifest. Otherwise, you're going to run into unwanted behaviors. So let's have a look at the JavaScript side. So this is the manifest. We expect to see something similar to this entry point setup thing here. And we don't, because apparently you can get away with not having an entry point setup if it's not strictly needed. So here you don't have it, but the panel works fine just the same. I don't know if they are going to require that in the future, but so far that's a possibility. But let's look at the kitchen sink for comparison. So in this case, the kitchen sink, so let me reload that once more. We saw that in a couple of previous videos. UI kitchen sink, it's here, manifest.json, open, and then also load it into Photoshop. Here it is. Let me close that white background that annoys me. All right, the kitchen sink is a particular panel in the sense that it contains both a panel, which is this one, and a command. So both of them, and you can see them better probably in the menu item. The kitchen sink is the plugin, and the reload plugin, which in this case just reloads the plugin, is a command. So it contains both of the different types. So you have two entry points, one object here for the type command ID reload plugin, and another one for the type panel with ID kitchen sink. And in the JavaScript, you have this entry points, and you should see them somewhere below. Let me try to find them. Entry points. Here, you have the entry points setup function that has both the commands and the panels. And this kitchen sink here is exactly the same ID that is defined in the manifest. So again, think about the manifest as what to display in the Photoshop UI versus the JavaScript, how to link this to actual functions. And one that you see here in the panels is the show function that takes a funny argument, but we won't go into that in this video, maybe in a later one. So what happens in this show is code that is run the first time that the panels show. In this case, they're using local storage. So let me briefly explain it to you. When you switch from tab to tab, the active tab is saved in the local storage so that in the next session, when you open the panel, it opens showing the same exact tab that you left off with, okay? So this is one possibility. Let me try to implement the same kind of functionality in this Hello World panel.js sample. So we need to import, again, the same, let me copy and paste because I'm lazy, the same entry point thing. So here above, we want to have the entry points. And then we need to run the setup function in the entry points. So entry points dot setup, and this accepts an object that has a panels property that in turn contains an object, again, that has this time the ID of the panel. And again, be aware that we're not talking about the ID of the plugin, but the ID of the panel, which is Hello World, okay? So this here and this one is going to have an object. And in here, we have a show function. And in this show function, what do I want to do? I don't know, just maybe show an alert. And show alert, again, is just a wrapper for the require Photoshop app show alert. So show alert and I don't know, showing like that. Okay, so let me save. Am I watching this plugin? I doubt. In fact, I'm not watching. Let me watch for changes. And let me save again just to trigger the watch. And it says showing. Now, very important thing. Don't think that this function shows every time that the panel is closed and reopened, because it won't. So let me close the kitchen sink. The Hello World sample is here. You see, it doesn't. And the reason why is that This shows only the first time because UXP panels are permanent by default. If you have experience with CEP panels, you know that the initialization code that they might contain would run each time that you reopen them, unless they are permanent, in which case the init code runs just once. Well, UXP panels are permanent by default, so no matter how many times that you close and reopen them, this show will run just once. If you want to run code based on the show hide status, you have to follow a different path that we might look at in a future video. So the bottom line is that this show alert just run once, okay? Okay, let me recap what we have seen so far. We can have plugins that contain just commands. Scripts must be wrapped with UXP plugins, and this is how to do it. You can have more than one command inside the same UXP plugin, and we've also seen how to export functions to be imported with this require syntax and the object destructuring syntax here. Then we have this Hello World panel sample where instead we have panels as opposed to commands. And this is defined by the type. We still have the ID, and we can have this entry point setup panels and the show function. Again, this must match the string that is found in the manifest.json, right? And then in the kitchen sink example, we have seen a plugin that contains both a command and a panel, and the way that the two are set up in the entry point setup, right? Okay, I think this is it for this time. I hope you have learned something new, and if this is the case, please consider supporting me. I want to thank all the people who made a donation. There's a button on my website. It's been truly very much appreciated. You can also purchase Alce and WSM in the Photoshop Marketplace, and if you happen to buy them, please leave a positive rating or a review, which will always help very much as well. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye!